A 15-year-old girl disappeared from her bedroom under mysterious circumstances. Police, the FBI, and hundreds of volunteers searched for her, diving into the case. Detectives uncovered many eerie facts and eventually solved this disturbing case. In this video, we tell you what happened to Riley Grossman and why the public was outraged when they learned the bitter truth. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. Riley Grossman was born on December 22, 2003, in the small American town of Martinsburg, West Virginia. Her parents divorced when she was young, and the girl moved with her mother and younger sister to Berkeley Springs, a town 40 kilometers from Martinsburg. After a while, her mother began dating another man, and they had 2 more children. However, Riley maintained a close relationship with her father and regularly went to visit him. The girl attended Berkeley Springs High School and took dance and singing lessons. She also had a boyfriend named Hayden Lacey. According to her parents, there was a great relationship between them. Riley was happy, and she and her boyfriend even had a joint Instagram account where they posted pictures together. Her mom, Chantel Oakley, worked 2 jobs. On May 7, 2019, she took off early from her morning shift because she wasn't feeling well. When she arrived home, she texted Riley that she was going to sleep in before her evening shift and asked her to wake her up when the girl returned from school. Riley came home at about 3:30 p.m., woke up her mother, and went to her room. Chantel's roommate's mother was also in the house with her that day, effectively replacing her grandmother and looking after the younger children. Chantel returned from work at about 10 p.m. As she walked past her daughter's room, she saw that her door was closed but the light was on behind it. Her mother thought Riley was getting ready for bed and went to bed herself. Almost immediately, she was still not feeling well and wanted to get a good night's sleep before her morning shift the next day. At about 7:15 a.m., Chantel peeked into her daughter's room before she left for work, but Riley wasn't there. She didn't see anything suspicious about that, though. School started at 7:45, and the girl could have gone there already. Riley's school was only a short walk away, so she got there on her own. About halfway through the day, her mother got a call from the school saying that Riley had missed some classes. This alarmed Chantel slightly, but she still didn't see it as a major concern. Her daughter could have just skipped a few classes and gone out with friends. At about 3:30 p.m., Riley's grandmother began to worry. The girl should have been home by now but still wasn't. Then she contacted Chantel, at which point her mother already suspected something was wrong. Riley was always calling or texting her to take time off to go out with friends after school, but that day she didn't get a single message from her daughter. Her mother had sent her several messages, and they had all failed to reach their destination. Then she tried calling her, but each time it went to voicemail. This indicated that Riley's phone was either dead or had been turned off for some reason. Chantel also called Riley's own father, hoping that the girl might have gone to him. However, he too did not contact his daughter that day. The mother asked her grandmother to go to the school and look for Riley there. The grandmother went there, but she was unable to locate the girl. None of the teachers knew where she could be either. Around 5 p.m., Chantel decided to take a day off from work and drove to the school, but she couldn't find her daughter either. She spotted her boyfriend in the parking lot and asked if he had seen Riley, but Hayden stated that he had spent the day on an out-of-town trip and had not even contacted her. Together, they went around the school grounds, looking in and around the building itself, but the girl was nowhere to be found. After a while, her mother decided to go home, hoping that Riley might have returned there. Alas, she was not there either. After waiting some more time, she decided to go to the police. By then, the girl's father had arrived in Berkeley Springs and went in search of his daughter. He drove around the small town asking people he met if they had seen Riley. With a population of just over 600, most of the residents knew each other. One of the local teenagers said he saw her walking down the street, but unfortunately, this information did nothing to help him find Riley, and investigators thought the boy was just mistaken. The police quickly began a search, interviewing everyone the girl knew. None of her friends had seen Riley that day, nor had she shown up at school. At the same time, several teachers noted that she was present in their classes. This misled the detectives at first, but it soon became clear these teachers had simply failed to notice the girl's absence and flagged her down. From conversations with Riley's acquaintances, the police began to reconstruct the chronology of events. They found out that on the evening of May 7th, the girl was on the phone with her boyfriend until 10:30 p.m., and she answered her friends' messages on social media until midnight. What follows is something very strange. At 5:40 a.m., Riley called her boyfriend by video link, but he was asleep at the time and didn't answer. The detectives immediately suspected something was wrong. Why was Riley trying to contact him at such an early hour? The girl's mother assured her that Riley would never run away from home. She simply had no reason to, given that she was the eldest child in the family. Her mother treated her very gently, almost never forbade her to go out with friends or a boyfriend, allowed her to go to her father's house in another town at any time, and generally did not control her every move. The only thing was that Riley always informed her of her plans and asked permission. Considering that the girl was only 15 years old at the time of her disappearance, she had no driver's license, so leaving town on her own in a car was not possible. This indicated that the theory of an escape seemed unlikely. Instead, the detectives considered kidnapping as the most likely theory. The same evening, Riley's mother contacted law enforcement and they began a search for the girl. Police officers searched the school, surrounding area, and combed the town. Community volunteers who cared about Riley joined the search. Small town residents, thinking something like this could never happen to them, were shocked. Soon, the police decided to search Riley's bedroom. There, they found the first grisly piece of evidence, a pillow and sheets with small blood stains. They sent the items to a lab for DNA testing, which confirmed that the blood belonged to Riley. It became evident that something terrible had happened to the girl. After the discovery of the blood, it became clear that Riley had not gone somewhere on her own initiative. It was up to the police to figure out what had occurred. The fact that her mother had not noticed traces of blood earlier was explained by the bed being made, and she didn't think to lift the blanket. The blood trail indicated that the girl had likely been attacked in her house. The police needed to identify the perpetrator. The search escalated, with more volunteers and equipment being provided. Press conferences were held to spread the story to the public in the hopes that someone might have noticed or heard something useful. The local police were joined by the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and state police. Together, they continued the search, but with no results. Eventually, on May 15th, law enforcement decided to bring in additional forces for a large-scale search. The next morning, they announced that Riley Crossman's body had been found about a 40-minute drive from Berkeley Springs, near a country road on a small mountain. It was clear that it was a murder, not an accident, as the body had been hidden away. Medical examiners couldn't determine the cause of death due to extensive decomposition, despite it only being just over a week since Riley's disappearance. Several other strange things were noticed, such as the girl wearing only one shoe and different clothing than what she was supposed to be wearing. Traces of whitewash or plaster were also found on her clothes. The case was reclassified as a homicide, and the police had to find the perpetrator. During re-interviews of Riley's relatives and acquaintances, discrepancies arose in the testimony of Andy McCauley, Chantel's roommate. Andy initially claimed he didn't leave work on Riley's birthday, but a neighbor saw a different car parked in front of their house. Andy's driver's license had been revoked, making it suspicious. The neighbor shared this observation with the police, leading to further questioning. Detectives determined that the vehicle belonged to one of Andy's co-workers, who often picked him up for work. Andy changed his statement multiple times, initially denying involvement, then admitting to using the pickup truck to buy illegal substances. More strange discoveries awaited the detectives. Riley's mother was asked about any oddities in her roommate's behavior. She recalled something unusual, which she shared with the police. On May 8th, the day her daughter disappeared, Andy had indeed been acting suspiciously when he returned home that night. Chantel told him about Riley's disappearance. The man immediately said he would go looking for her, got on his bicycle, and rode off. However, when the woman returned home from her search, she found Andy asleep on the couch as if nothing had happened. This behavior was very strange. All of Riley's relatives had been combing the streets until late at night, helped by concerned townspeople, while Andy simply went to sleep as if nothing had happened. In addition, one day after the girl went missing, Chantel called Andy and recorded the conversation. Unfortunately, its full content was not disclosed. All we know is that Chantel was already suspicious of Andy at this point and linked it all to his addiction to illegal substances. The police then spoke to Andy's co-worker and found out that, in fact, the man had been absent from work from about 9 a.m. until about 2 p.m. The co-worker also stated that he believed Andy had banned substances with him to begin with, so there was no reason for him to go somewhere to get them. The detectives then searched for the green Dodge and found a large stain of dried plaster in the trunk. Forensics showed that it was the same substance found on Riley's clothing. Investigators also led service dogs to the pickup, which detected a deadly smell in the trunk. 2 of the exact same bolts were found near Riley's body. The police soon found another inconsistency in Andy's statement. They examined camera footage from nearby communities and found that on May 8th, the man was only a few miles from where Riley's body would later be found. He was caught on gas station store cameras and on several traffic cameras. It was all very strange. Andy didn't have a driver's license, was usually picked up by other people, and got around on his bike. But this day, for some reason, he took someone else's car and drove around for half a day on unfamiliar routes. Another co-worker told the police that on May 8th, Andy asked him for 3 construction bags. Detectives were also approached by Andy's former co-worker who told an even creepier story. He said that he and Andy had never gotten along, but between about 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. on May 8th, Andy called him dozens of times and also sent a whole bunch of messages. He was in a panic and said he needed to hide with someone right away. Andy explained that he was in possession of illegal substances and was afraid of being caught. This former colleague did not let him in that night but later reported the story to the police. In his defense, the man stated that he had taken illegal substances at night, after which he noticed a police car parked not far from his house and panicked. However, the police department checked this information and found that none of their cars were in that area. This meant that Andy's story was a common lie. All of the above was enough for the police to arrest Andy the day after the body was found and charge him with murder. The man denied guilt, so the case went to trial. The case then stalled for more than 2 years as the trial did not begin until September 27, 2021. This was due to the coronavirus and the limitations associated with it, as well as the peculiarities of the US court system where such delays are the norm. Nevertheless, even more gruesome details of the case emerged during the course of the trial. For starters, Chantel, in her speech, provided one disturbing detail about the evening of May 7th. That afternoon, she returned from work at 10 p.m. and Andy was asleep on the couch. When she entered the room, the man immediately woke up. When she saw his eyes, Chantel immediately thought he had taken illegal substances. Andy had used powerful drugs before and even had a criminal record for possession, of which the woman was well aware. Further, the prosecution revealed information about disturbing messages sent from Riley's phone shortly before her disappearance. At 11 p.m. on May 7th, the girl texted her boyfriend that Andy had just gone into her room. 12 minutes later, she sent another text where she wrote that she was scared. She never contacted him again. Unfortunately, Hayden had already gone to bed at that time and did not see these messages. By morning, they had already been deleted. At trial, he also said that Andy had repeatedly entered Riley's room that night. The girl was video chatting with her boyfriend, and Hayden could hear him enter the room. Andy asked her to do the dishes and talked about some other mundane things, but Riley was unequivocally afraid of him. She asked the guy not to pass out while Andy was in her room. It also came out at trial that Andy had called Riley several times around 3 a.m., but she wouldn't pick up the phone, and on the third time, she blocked his number altogether. The whole thing was very creepy and incomprehensible. According to the prosecution's version, Andy made these calls to see if Riley was communicating with her boyfriend at the time. Later, the records of these calls were deleted from both phones, but the cell phone provider still had them. Despite all this, the prosecution had no evidence to indicate what had happened that night. They speculated that Andy killed Riley late that night, waited until morning, and drove to work. He then borrowed a co-worker's car, drove to the house, picked up the body, and took it to a secluded spot. He then cleared the message and call history from her phone and got rid of it. It also emerged at trial that Chantel and Andy's own mother not only knew about his addiction to illegal substances, but they also knew that under their influence, the man was becoming aggressive and dangerous. The final court hearing was held on October 5, 2021. Despite the fact that all available evidence was circumstantial and did not directly connect Andy to the murder, the jury reached a guilty verdict. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Further consideration was given to the possibility of parole. Andy's attorneys asked to give their client the option after 15 years, but the judge ultimately ruled for life without the possibility of parole. As the judge pronounced the sentence, Andy showed no emotion. He also seemed detached and uninterested at previous hearings. Apparently, he had resigned himself to the inevitable. But what about motive? Because of the degree of decomposition, the experts could not establish whether Riley had been abused. However, this is the most obvious option, even though the court could not prove it. This story was widely covered in the American media, and people's opinions were divided. Some put part of the blame on the girl's mother, who brought a convicted drug addict into her home and built a family with him. At the trial, she assured them that it had never even occurred to her that Andy might harm her children. Others defended the mother, believing that she could not have foreseen such an outcome. She worked 2 jobs most of the time to feed her family, and perhaps she didn't even have time to think about how her decisions might affect her children. What remains unclear is the moment of that 5:30 a.m. video call made from Riley Hayden's phone. Was the girl still alive at that moment, or did Andy make the call to throw off the investigation later? Do you think Chantel should be blamed for the situation? Tell us what you think, and don't forget to like this video. Take care and thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video. Take care and thanks. A 16-year-old girl, Fawn Cox, lived with her parents and younger sisters in a small 2-story house situated in a rough residential neighborhood. Despite their limited means, Fawn helped take care of her siblings, attended church regularly, and enjoyed swimming. At 16, she took on a part-time job at a local amusement park during her summer vacations in 1989. Welcome to Z Crime Stories. Before we start, don't forget like video and subscribe for more. On July 26th, after finishing her shift at around 10 p.m., Fawn's mother and younger sister picked her up by car since public transportation would have been time-consuming. Upon returning home, Fawn went straight to bed as she had to work the following morning, sleeping alone on the second floor. Her sister Amber was babysitting for a neighbor, while Felicia chose to sleep on the cooler first floor where the only functioning air conditioner was located. The next morning, at around 9 o'clock, the family was awakened by the alarm clock in Fawn's room, which she failed to turn off. Concerned, her mother and younger sister went to her room, where they were met with a horrifying scene. Fawn lay lifeless on her bed, her neck visibly bruised, devoid of pulse. Despite calling for an ambulance, Fawn had already passed away several hours earlier. Medical experts determined that she had been strangled and also subjected to abuse prior to her death. The police faced a challenging investigation. Despite the murder occurring in a small house with poor soundproofing, Fawn's parents and sister heard nothing due to the loud air conditioner on the first floor. The only unusual occurrence was noticed by Fawn's sister, their anxious, barking poodle. However, they attributed the dog's behavior to pregnancy, unaware of its significance. Upon examining the crime scene, the police made several important discoveries. They theorized that the attacker or group entered the house through a second-story window overlooking the backyard. A nearby parked trailer facilitated access to the window, which had been left open due to the lack of air conditioning on the second floor. In Fawn's room, investigators found crucial clues: short hairs, small blood stains, and traces of semen on her bedsheet, all sent for laboratory analysis. Several items were also missing from the house, while others were found discarded on the ground outside. Further inspection revealed that items had been taken from a closet in an adjoining room on the second floor. It appeared that the perpetrator had been hiding in the closet, waiting for the household to sleep. However, since Fawn's sister didn't sleep in that room that night, the missing items went unnoticed. Another peculiar clue emerged: an old army cap found in Fawn's room, which her relatives claimed to have never seen her wear. Detectives believe that the killer may have left the cap behind accidentally. Despite the substantial evidence, the police struggled to identify suspects quickly. In 1989, DNA forensics were underdeveloped, and genetic databases were not commonly available. Detective Benjamin Caldwell, in charge of the case, proposed a theory that multiple assailants, familiar with the house, were involved. They not only knew how to access the second floor through the backyard but were also acquainted with the room layout. The next step for the police was to seek witnesses. They interviewed neighbors, friends, and relatives of Fawn but obtained inconclusive information. Complicating matters was the impoverished neighborhood, home to various criminal gangs, making it challenging to bring potential perpetrators to justice. Before we continue, don't forget like video and subscribe. 1 month after Fawn's murder, the case finally gained momentum. The police obtained a witness who provided crucial information that had not been made public, lending credibility to their account. This witness led the police to 3 teenage suspects, one of whom was in the same class as Fawn. The boys were arrested and questioned, but they vehemently denied any involvement in the murder. During a search of one of the suspects' homes, stolen items from Fawn's room were discovered. This evidence was sufficient to charge all 3 teenagers with murder. However, the detectives faced disappointment yet again. Firstly, the witness suddenly recanted their statement and ceased cooperating with the investigation. Secondly, DNA analysis conducted on blood, hair, and semen found at the crime scene did not definitively match the samples collected from the suspects. In those years, the technology for precise matching was not available, yielding inconclusive results. Nevertheless, one of the detainees provided valuable information during an interrogation. He confessed to breaking into Fawn's house that night with the company of other boys and stealing items. He described how he accessed the second floor through the canopy and revealed previously unknown details. According to his account, when he threw a tape recorder out of the window, the handle detached and fell. He hid it under a nearby bush, and the police indeed found the item in that exact location. However, the young man quickly recanted his confession and stopped cooperating with the investigation, rendering it inadmissible in court. Consequently, the police had to release the suspects, and the investigation came to a halt once again. It is likely that the witnesses were intimidated, and without their testimony, the case had minimal prospects. One of the suspects did serve 8 months in jail for stealing items from Fawn's house. The case remained dormant until the early 2000s when the police reopened the investigation. The first step was uploading DNA samples from the crime scene to the CODIS database, which had been established several years earlier and contained DNA profiles of individuals involved in serious crimes. Unfortunately, no matches were found for the killer. The creation of this database was a result of significant scientific advancements in DNA analysis and allowed the police to reanalyze DNA samples from the original suspects using more advanced techniques. This time, experts conclusively determined that the hair, semen, and blood did not belong to any of the three individuals. This discrepancy was perplexing considering the suspects were found in possession of Fawn's belongings. Detectives speculated that the three boys had indeed burglarized her house that night but had an accomplice who perpetrated the abuse and murder. This raised further questions. Could it be that 4 criminals entered the house undetected, killed Fawn, and left without a trace? The police had no answers to this question, and the case once again reached a standstill. As the years passed, the hope of solving Fawn's murder dwindled for her family. They remained convinced that the 3 initial suspects had been present in their house that night and might hold information about the killer but would never disclose it. The only possibility of uncovering the truth lay in a DNA sample stored in the police lab. Before we continue, don't forget like video and subscribe. The authorities, their lack of resources, and the sheer number of unsolved cases posed significant challenges. In 2018, an intriguing development occurred. Fawn's younger sister, Amber, disclosed previously unknown details about the crime on a well-known American forum dedicated to unsolved crimes. The forum had gained a reputation for reliability over its 2 decades of existence, and its participants had assisted the police in solving several high-profile cases. Amber's identity was verified, adding credibility to her posts. She revealed that she worked as a nanny during the week and only stayed at home on weekends, sleeping in the same room on the 2nd floor through which the burglars had entered. If criminals had indeed broken in, they would have been immediately noticed. Additionally, they would have needed to surveil the house and wait for Fawn's mother and younger sister to arrive to pick her up from work. Despite Amber's revelation, the case remained unsolved. However, it was now 2018, and advancements in DNA research had come a long way. New analysis tools were leading to the resolution of numerous long-forgotten cases. Fawn's relatives, aware of these advancements, questioned why the police were not reopening the murder investigation. They persisted in their conversations with the detectives, only to receive the same response each time: that extended DNA testing required funding, and the police had numerous cases to prioritize. Thus, the relatives had to wait for their turn and for funding to become available. Taking matters into their own hands, the family launched a fundraiser in 2019. They aimed to cover the full cost of DNA samples and offered a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The case received extensive media coverage, and through interviews and appeals, many caring individuals responded to the family's requests for assistance. The necessary funds were quickly raised. However, their hopes were dashed once again when the police department refused to initiate the investigation using the funds provided by the victims' relatives. The lead detective explained the challenges that would arise from such a situation. If the relatives of one victim could pay for tests and expedite the results, hundreds of other families who had been searching for years for the murderers of their loved ones would also expect the same right. Implementing such a system in practice would be impossible, as only a few laboratories worldwide conducted innovative DNA tests. With a simultaneous influx of requests, their resources would be insufficient. Paraben Nanolabs, a leading company in the field, had made significant advancements in DNA analysis, including identifying a person's relatives from minimal genetic samples and creating an approximate portrait of the DNA's owner. The family believed that this lab should take over the study of the samples from Fawn's bedroom on the night of her murder. Fawn's relatives suspected that the police were not actively pursuing the case due to their impoverished background and the neighborhood they lived in. Murder investigations were not prioritized for families like theirs. In an interview, Fawn's sister expressed her belief that if the murder had involved a wealthy or influential family, the investigations would have been conducted promptly. Unfortunately, the process could not be expedited, and it wasn't until late 2020 that a significant breakthrough occurred. However, the family was unprepared for the shocking truth that followed. With funding from the FBI, the police sent the samples from Fawn's room to a lab for detailed DNA analysis and a search for potential relatives of the DNA's owner. The semen sample found at the murder scene was primarily examined. In November 2020, they finally identified the individual to whom the DNA belonged: Fawn's cousin, Donald Cox. The revelation shook the entire family. At the time of Fawn's death, Donald was 21 years old, and his possible involvement had never been considered. Donald had a troubled history and had been frequently incarcerated for misdemeanors such as theft and drug possession. However, during those years, DNA samples were not collected from such criminals, which delayed the resolution of the case. Donald died of an overdose in 2006, and his death was investigated due to suspicious circumstances. A DNA sample was preserved during that investigation but was not entered into the FBI database since he was a victim, not a perpetrator. Once the experts informed the police about this discovery, they matched the sample with the semen found at the murder scene, resulting in a 100% match. Despite the significance of this revelation, the police closed the case and did not file new charges against the 3 original suspects. Fawn's sister believed that there was no point in trying to obtain a confession from them. While the suspects had been present in the house that night, they may not have witnessed the actual murder. It was possible that Donald had been alone in the house and subsequently attacked Fawn. Felicia, another sister of Fawn, added that the 3 suspects had already faced consequences for their actions. Throughout the unsolved case, the entire neighborhood was convinced of their guilt, leading to negative treatment and consequences for them. Furthermore, after the case was closed, it was revealed that the police initially learned about the suspects from the family of one of them. The family members noticed a Nintendo console among his belongings and remembered that it had been stolen from Fawn's house. This information became public knowledge through news reports, and everyone in the neighborhood was aware of the details. In any case, proving the guilt of the 3 original suspects was impossible. The relatives of the victim finally knew the name of the killer, but he lived for 17 years without facing any punishment for his crime. During that time, he continued to have contact with his family, but his addiction to illegal substances ultimately led to his demise, rendering him no longer a threat to anyone. Like the video if they found it appealing.
A 20-year-old student went for a run and disappeared without a trace. The whole country was watching for her, and the police could not find a single clue. The truth revealed through surveillance footage shocked all of America and sparked fierce controversy. Today, we will tell you the story of Molly Tibbetts and what her disappearance led to. Molly Tibbetts was born on May 8, 1988, in San Francisco, California. When she was in 2nd grade, her parents divorced, and Molly moved to Iowa with her mother and 2 brothers. Her father, however, continued to maintain a close relationship with his children. After high school, she enrolled at Iowa State University as a psychology major. In her spare time, she worked at a day camp at the Regional Medical Center. She had an active lifestyle, played sports, and had many friends. She spent the summer of 2018 in a tiny town called Brooklyn, which is also in Iowa. It is barely over 3 kilometers in size and only has 1,400 people living there. It would seem that in such a quiet place where everyone knows each other, nothing terrible could happen. On July 18, 2018, Molly was going for a run. She was living in Brooklyn with her boyfriend, Dalton Jack, at his brother's house. On the evening of that day, she was in the house alone. Her boyfriend was away at work in another town 210 kilometers from Brooklyn. Molly sent him a picture on Snapchat and went out for a run at about 7:30 p.m. The next day, Molly was supposed to go to work, but she never showed up. This seriously disturbed her family and boyfriend. They all knew that the girl was extremely responsible and never missed work without warning. In addition, she did not respond to calls and messages. As a result, the parents decided to contact the police, who began a search for Molly. From the early days, the case began to attract increased attention across America. As for the residents of Brooklyn, the disappearance of a young girl was a real shock. Nothing like this had ever happened in this quiet town before. People had never locked their doors and were sure of their own safety. Molly's father, Rob Tibbetts, came to Brooklyn from San Francisco and took an active part in the search. He handed out flyers with her photographs, questioned people, and tried in every way to help the investigation. The parents did not give up hope until the very last moment that their daughter would be found alive and unharmed. 3 agencies got involved in the search for the girl: the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Poweshiek County Police Department. Together, they worked on more than 2,000 leads and interviewed about 500 people. The search for Molly was scattered throughout Brooklyn's neighborhoods. At one point, law enforcement received a report that Molly had been spotted at a truck stop in Kearney, Missouri, 380 miles from Brooklyn. The police checked this information and could find no confirmation. The police, as is proper in such cases, checked the theory that her boyfriend was involved. Statistically, most crimes of this nature are committed by relatives or loved ones, but not this time. The boyfriend's alibi was ironclad. He really was in another city and physically couldn't have been in Brooklyn that night. Time passed, and the search for Molly yielded no results. The Criminal Investigation Division announced a cash reward for any information leading to the girl's return alive and unharmed. The amount grew steadily and eventually reached $366,000. This was a very substantial amount of money, even by U.S. standards, and for the state of Iowa, the reward was a record. At one point, the police said they were narrowing the search for Molly to a few locations around Brooklyn: her boyfriend's house, several local farms, a gas station, a truck stop, and a car wash. But none of it helped to locate Molly. The police received hundreds of leads, each of which led to a dead end. There was one episode, however, that struck me as odd. The owner of one of the pig farms where the police concentrated their search was extremely reluctant to contact law enforcement. He denied any involvement in Molly's disappearance, but refused to take a polygraph examination. All this made him an excellent candidate for the role of suspect, but there was no evidence against him. This meant that the police could neither interrogate the man nor search his farm. The police tried to find some connection between the farmer and Molly's disappearance, but they were unsuccessful, at least at that time. However, everything changed on August 21st. A few days earlier, a law enforcement source told reporters that the police had found the body of a young white woman. Of course, everyone immediately assumed it was Molly, and they were right. On August 21st, the police issued an official statement. Molly Tibbetts' body was found in Poweshiek County, where Brooklyn was located. The parents identified their daughter, and the investigators immediately noticed she was missing two items she always took with her: a smartphone and a fitness bracelet. Soon, the medical examiner made an official conclusion. The girl was attacked by several blows with a sharp object. This further shocked the residents of Brooklyn. They all knew each other and could not even think that there was a violent criminal among them. The newspapers also broke the story, making the whole of America talk about it. The solution to this gruesome crime was, nor did the police have much hope in the case, given the complete lack of evidence. No one believed that the girl and child could be found. Compounding the situation was the fact that crucial time for the search had been lost in the first few days. 24 years had passed. Mark had started a new family and he had two daughters. He had long ago stopped believing that he would one day see Charlotte and Mark alive. But in 2001, the case took a new turn. Charlotte's daughter from her first marriage, Jennifer, flew to Hawaii and went to the police station. She convinced them to reopen the case of her mother's disappearance. The detectives agreed, put Charlotte and Mark's information into the missing persons database, and created a computer portrait of Mark growing up based on his childhood photo. The first thing the detectives decided to do was to interrogate Mark because his behavior in the early stages of the investigation seemed strange to them. There was no mention in the old documents that the man had called the police station by phone 2 days after the girl and child disappeared. It said he did not come to the police station until 3 weeks later. This led detectives to believe that Mark may have been involved in their disappearance. Even though 24 years had passed since then, the police tried to find any witnesses who lived near Mark and Charlotte's home. Of course, most of the residents had already changed, but the detectives were lucky enough to find one senior citizen who had lived there back then. He remembered Mark and Charlotte and told the detectives an interesting fact. According to the pensioner, the couple often quarreled, and he heard them shouting. The detectives then decided that the case was getting close to a solution, and Mark was indeed guilty. He was called in for questioning and told about the witness who had heard his regular arguments with Charlotte. Mark did not deny that there had indeed been verbal altercations between them. He also asked to see a married couple who would never fight. Detectives tried with all their might to prove his guilt and offered Mark to voluntarily undergo an interrogation with a polygraph. The results were ambiguous. The specialist who read the testimony could not give a clear answer whether the man was guilty or not. A polygraph is inherently an overrated instrument. It is not physically capable of showing whether a suspect is lying or not. Dozens of factors can affect its results, which can be mistaken for the truth and vice versa. If an innocent person is very nervous during an interrogation or withholds completely different information that is relevant to the questions, the polygraph can make him out to be a liar. In Mark's case, the polygraph was of no use either. But the detectives decided to approach it from a different angle. They obtained a warrant to examine the house where Charlotte and Mark lived in 1977. What interested them the most was the terrace built shortly after the girl and child went missing. They speculated that Charlotte might not have gone anywhere that day, but might have been hurt by her husband in another quarrel and ended up in the ground under the terrace. It is not clear how the police imagined the events of that day and how an infant fits into the story, but they had no other versions. Forensics dug through the backyard and examined the terrace, but they were unable to find any trace of anyone's remains there. It is not known if they compensated the new owners of the house for the 2 days of digging in the backyard. The detectives admitted they had nothing else to work with and set the case aside again. As a last resort, they took DNA samples from Jennifer and Mark, hoping it would someday help. The case went into a long drawer again for a full 10 years. But after that time came the grand finale to this whole tangled story. Steve Carter, 35, of Philadelphia, had wondered about his past from an early age. He grew up in an orphanage, and at the age of 4, he was adopted by a wealthy New Jersey couple. The U.S. Army officer and his wife loved the baby and cared for him as their own. Steve also loved his foster parents, but he always wondered how he ended up in the orphanage. In 2011, he stumbled upon an internet article that told the amazing story of Caroline White, who had been kidnapped from the hospital when she was just 19 days old. Decades later, Caroline was browsing missing children's websites and found her childhood photo there. She realized with horror that it was her current parents who had kidnapped her from the hospital. Steve Carter was inspired by the story and began researching the same sites. He entered his birth information on his certificate and was immediately speechless. The first result showed an adult photo of him taken by artists based on a baby picture. The resemblance was so strong that Carter could not even move in shock. He realized he was the same Max Barnes who had gone missing in Hawaii with his birth mother. After recovering from his shock, Steve made the decision to take a DNA test. Taking the opportunity through a missing child search service, their database contained DNA samples of Mark and Jennifer taken by the police 10 years earlier. After 8 months of waiting, the test showed an exact match. Steve Carter turned out to be Mark Barnes. Police instantly reopened the investigation. The missing infant found himself 34 years later, but the circumstances of his disappearance were still a mystery, but not for long. His birth certificate helped solve the mystery. First, the certificate was not issued until a year after the birth of the child. Second, his name was Tenzin Amia, and his mother's name was Jane Amia. That's what helped the police connect the two key strands, because that name had already appeared in the reports not long after Charlotte and the child disappeared. The police received a strange call shortly after. A woman reported that a girl with an infant baby had knocked on her door and asked for milk to feed her. The police arrived on the scene believing that the girl was in an inadequate state. She was taken to a psychiatric clinic for evaluation, and the infant was handed over to the guardianship authorities. This girl was Charlotte. After a few days in the hospital, she secretly escaped and was never seen again. The child remained in the care of the state because he did not even have a birth certificate, and it was impossible to identify his relatives. When the truth came out, everyone had a legitimate question. Why did the police not compare the disappearance of the girl and the baby to another situation, especially when the infant was left in the care of the state? Couldn't they have realized that they had the very same child in front of them? Now, 34 years later, it's hard to answer that question. Perhaps the police simply didn't know about the disappearance because the two cases were handled by two different precincts. Steve, who by then was working in a prestigious job and had a family of his own, decided to make contact with his half-sister and biological father. They were shocked when the man revealed his own disappearance. No one believed anymore that the infant might still be alive. Although we don't know what happened to Charlotte, the ending of this story can definitely be considered happy. Statistics tell us that the chances of finding missing children after so many years are zero, but the case of Mark Barnes was one of the rare exceptions. He grew up in a wonderful family, received a good upbringing, and became a successful man. Most likely, Charlotte was indeed suffering from a serious mental disorder. She knocked on the door of a stranger asking for milk to feed her son. Perhaps the call to the police saved the infant's life. Who knows how Charlotte's mental state would have changed in the future? It is still unknown what happened to her, and it is unlikely that the mystery will ever be solved. Considering that she never tried to contact her husband or find her son, The woman could have died a short time after escaping from the asylum.